Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Crypto.com Live AMA. My name is Tommy from Crypto.com and I will be your host for today. And in today's AMA, we will be joined by Jason, Director of Business Development at Axelar. And for those of you who are not familiar, Axelar Network is a blockchain that connects multiple blockchains and enabling universal Web3 interoperability. The network is secured using proof-of-stake consensus, and messages are routed and translated using permissionless protocols. And here to answer your questions today about Axelar is Jason. Hi, Jason. Welcome, and thanks for joining us for this AMA.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. It's great to be here and excited to share a little bit more about Axelar today.
Yep, thank you. And before we dive into the questions, can you tell us more about yourself? Like, how do you get into crypto and how do you get into Axelar?
Yeah, for sure. So, my crypto story is quite funny. Like many of us, I was following crypto very closely in early 2017. This was a time when everyone was talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum. Knew very little about crypto at the time, other than that it was one of those exciting things that prices really moved very quickly, and I very much followed it as speculative assets. Later in my career, I ended up working in fast growth tech companies, one of them being WeWork. And I was with WeWork during the hyper growth phase, as well as, the bust phase where, we had to restructure because it was a very capital intensive business. So, after that experience, I really understood the importance of working for a true tech company, right? That's far more scalable, not capital intensive. And I was really at crossroads between joining a crypto company or going into AI. I ended up getting a great opportunity to join Ripple, based in London, part of their go-to-market strategy and operations team. So that's kind of how I officially started working in crypto. But for me, I always wanted to tackle emerging problems. And at the time, there was already more and more blockchains. And for me, I knew interoperability was one of the critical problems facing crypto. And really, it's one of the most important factors to help this industry scale. So when I learned more about Axelar and the technology behind it, I was convinced that this was a company that I wanted to help build.
Right, that's an exciting journey from Web 2 to into Web 3 world. So yes, let's get into the community questions that we have for today. And so to start with, right, as we are all aware, cross-chain protocols are important infrastructure that enable assets and also general message passing across different blockchains and ecosystem, as opposed to like having each of the blockchain operating in a silo. So just to lay the ground here, what are the different types of bridges currently exist and what are the key differences between them?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question, Tommy. One of the frustrating parts from our side is that today the average person think of bridging as everything interoperability related, right? People don't really understand the difference between the different types of bridges. But on a very high level, you can see that there's two types of bridges. You have traditional asset bridges and arbitrary messaging bridges. And most people are still stuck on the first generation of these asset bridges. So what are asset bridges? Asset bridges involve locking assets on one chain, on the source chain, and then minting a wrapped version of that asset on a destination chain. So, when we hear the news about, oh, a bridge has been hacked and an asset has been pegged, it's often involving these asset bridges and wrapped assets. However, with newer technology like Axelar, there's something now called message passing. And these new messaging bridges has the ability to pass any payload across the chains that they support. And with this, they're able to call contracts and really create this more seamless, natively interchain experience.
Yep. Thanks, Jason. I think you already answered my second question. So the second question was like which type of bridges Axelar belongs to, right? So, but I think like you already answered that. So let's go a bit into like the first type of like transfer, right? So on asset transfer, so I understand that so the asset will be routed through the liquidity of Axelar USDC, right? So can you walk us through what is Axelar USDC and how an asset can be transferred from one chain to another through the Axelar USDC?
Yeah, just before we get into that, Tommy, I just want to make sure that people are clear. So Axelar actually has both. Axelar has both asset transfers as well as message passing. So for some ecosystems such as Cosmos and Kava, a lot of times these new blockchain ecosystems don't have a lot of native assets. So they still need, as traditional asset bridges in order to have wrapped assets, because otherwise they'll have nothing. So for those ecosystems like Cosmos and Kava, actually Axelar does have a traditional asset bridge called satellite.money. So you'll find Axelar wrap versions of those assets in these ecosystems, and they're for the most part canonical, as in these are the assets that everyone use with the deepest liquidity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very clear.
And yeah, moving on to your next question, you mentioned about asset transfers and using liquidity of Axelar USDC. So Axelar USDC, just to clarify what that is the bridged version of Ethereum USDC by Axelar. So for every Ethereum USDC, there is one Axelar USDC that's minted, right? It's always one-to-one. And as I mentioned earlier, in some ecosystems where native USDC isn't present, like Cosmos, like Kava, Axelar USDC is very popular because it's, in many people's eyes, the next best thing to native USDC. However, what's very cool about Axelar USDC is that it can also incorporate Axelar's message passing standards, which means you can actually pass a message with this asset, right? So one of the applications built on top of Axelar is called Squid. And Squid is this cross-chain liquidity router that leverages Axelar USDC to enable one-click cross-chain swaps. So, from a user's perspective, you go to Squid router and try out the application, as well as many DEXs that's integrated Squid. It's a simple interface, right? The user selects the source chain, whichever asset they want to swap, and then the destination chain and whichever asset they want to end with. And these includes any asset, right? Even lower liquidity assets. But what's actually happening in the back end is that the asset that you're trying to swap from is swapped to native USDC, and then that native USDC is swapped to Axelar USDC. And then the Axelar USDC is what's actually being bridged between the source and destination chain. And so Axelar USDC in this case is actually what's routing the liquidity across chains, right? And there's a few advantages to this architecture, right? The number one, as I mentioned, is that you can literally swap any native asset into any other native asset on any of the 43 chains supported by Axelar. The second benefit of this is because you're using one asset as the routing asset, you're able to have the deepest liquidity and help users get the best rates. And lastly, because Axelar USDC is used as an intermediary, it's also a lot safer for the users, right? Because it's not changing value during the cross-chain swap process.
I see. So yeah, so the goal here is to have a more secure, stable kind of cross-chain solutions that everyone can access to, even if the USDC is not native to the chain, as long as Axelar support that. So yeah, so let's move to the next question about apart from the asset transfer side, right? Let's talk about the general message passing, so also known as the GMP, right? So what are the key differences in terms of technical design between the two, and is it technologically harder to do GMP than simply a asset transfer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so like I mentioned earlier, right? When you're passing assets, oftentimes you're simply locking an asset and minting a wrap version of the asset. But with message passing, it's a lot more technically challenging because you have to be, in order to call contracts across different chains, you need to be able to read and write in the local language of that chain and understand the consensus rules of that chain. And how Axelar is able to do this is Axelar has what's known as gateway contracts on each of the chains we're connected to. And these gateway contracts, you can think of them as almost like a translator that can understand, read and write in the language of that chain. So if I were to call a contract, let's say from Avalanche to Arbitrum, what's happening is that the contract call begins on the gateway contract on Avalanche. It then has to get routed through the Axelar chain where our validators has to reach consensus. And after they reach consensus, then it gets relayed to the gateway contract. And then it gets passed to the gateway contract on the destination chain on Arbitrum before it's being finally relayed to the destination application. So, just to summarize, it's incredibly harder to build. And that's why there's only a few bridges today that has message passing abilities and certainly support the less number of chains than Axelar does.
Right. So how many ecosystems do Axelar support right now? I think you mentioned around 43. And what's the expansion plan in the coming future?
Yeah, so as I mentioned today, Axelar supports 43 blockchains, and this includes all of the major EVMs, L1, L2, as well as almost all of the major Cosmos IBC chains. So, for us, we're really bullish on L2s as well as ZK EVM chains. What's coming up for us next is going to be Linea, Polygon ZK EVM, as well as Base. And what we're really excited for is that by the end of Q3, we're launching the Axelar virtual machine, which is really the programmable layer on top of the Axelar blockchain. And one of the implications of this is the ability for blockchains to then permissionlessly add themselves to the Axelar network. And with that implemented, we'll be able to support substantially more blockchains substantially faster. Because today, when we add a chain, the bulk of the engineering effort is on the Axelar tech team. But with the Axelar virtual machine being launched, we'll be able to get other teams, other blockchains to do a lot of the work, such as building out the gateway contract and the relayer.
Right. So now let's dive a bit more into the technical realm, right? So for Axelar to operate, it requires validators to run nukes for the Axelar supported chains, the 43 ecosystem that you mentioned. But what kind of nukes are the validators required to run on the supported chains? Are they required to run like a full nuke on the chains that Axelar supported in order for Axelar to operate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So validators play a very key role in securing the Axelar network. Um, the role of the role of a node operator is suitable, for people that only has very advanced technical skills. The feedback from our validators is from a lot of them who's ran validators on other networks. Running validators on Axelar is the most complex, and one of the key reasons for that is that the validators have to run full nodes on all of our EVM chains. So for the Cosmos IBC chains, we're able to connect to them via IBC, but for these EVM chains, they do have to run full nodes.
Okay, that's very clear. So let's take an example, right? Say if there's a request to transfer funds from a source chain A to chain B. So if I'm a validator, do I need to run full nukes on both chains if I want to like facilitate this particular transfer? Or is it more like a two-stage processes, right? Where even if I run nukes on chain A and chain C only instead of chain A and chain B, I can still verify something on chain A and let the other Axelar validators to come in who only run nukes for chain B to process the gateway smart contract transfer on the destination chain.
Yeah, that's a great question. So today, if you look at our validators, which you can find on Axelar Scan, almost all of them run full nodes on all of the EVM chains. And the reason for that is our validators, of course, are rewarded for validating and securing the network, right? And the more nodes and networks they support, the more incentives they get. It is possible for them to only run chains that they want to maintain, but then they might lose out on transaction fees and get poor validator performance.
Got it. So beside validator, right, the other role that you mentioned is a relayer. So how are they being rewarded for doing the relaying work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, on the relaying services, I want to emphasize the relayer services are an optional service provided by Axelar. We see this really as a unique benefit that Axelar provides, right? If you look at many of the other cross-chain solutions on the market today, we wouldn't say they're full stack solutions. And what we mean by that is they don't own the full infrastructure stack and they don't provide services such as relaying service. A lot of times, applications developers that are building these cross-chain applications have to build out their own relayers, which is, based on the feedback we've heard, not something that developers want to do, right? If you're focused on your application, you want to be just focused on writing out the core logic and not building on these infrastructure pieces. So, with that said, for our relaying services, how it works is that there are tasks that can be performed by anyone, right? And no form of trust is actually required to authorize or complete the tasks. And after a transaction has been validated, anyone can then technically relay this transaction. So as a developer, you can either use Axelar's relayer services, or you can build out your own relayer.
Right. So I think an example of the Axelar relayer services is the guest receiver. So in order to call the smart contract on the destination chain, users can pay the gas fee on the source chain. But then because like there's always a fluctuation in terms of like the network traffic on like the destination chain, also like the gas fee will fluctuate a lot, right, depending on the usage, right? So how do you calculate the amount of fees you need to collect in the source chain upfront, right, in order to cover the destination chain gas fee?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So when it comes to cross-chain transactions, you can largely think of it as there's three components to the gas fee. You have the gas fee on the source chain, you have the relay fee, and then the gas cost on the destination chain. Axelar's gas services make paying for cross-chain gas very simple. What it allows is for users and developers to just pay gas in the native currency of the source chain. And then the amount of gas for the destination chain and relay fee is actually covered. And this not only makes it more convenient for builders and users, but also there's an additional benefit to this, which is you can actually overcharge for gas so that when there is gas volatility on the network, the transaction still goes through and is more reliable. And then we have an additional feature called the gas refund that refunds the remaining gas back to the user. And so the end result is that you have more reliable transactions and the users only pay for what they need.
Understood. So I think actually what you guys are trying to do is not just like building like a cross-chain solution itself, right? It's actually a programmable interoperability layer with like applications such as Prime, Junkyard, and also Squid that you mentioned earlier, and many more building on top. So what are some of the interesting trends that you're observing in Axelar's ecosystem? What kind of like protocols are trying to build on top of leveraging on the Axelar technology stack?
Yeah, for sure. I'd say there's three major trends that we're seeing. The first one is that there's more and more of what we would call natively interchain applications. If you spoke to developers even a year ago, they would have said, I'm building on one chain, let's say Avalanche. And then maybe they'll have plans on expanding into, let's say, Ethereum down the line. Today, if you speak to most developers like I do every day, most people are saying something very different. They're saying, right on day one, I'm going to be launching on chains X, Y, and Z, 2 or 3 chains, with the plans of expanding to another 3 chains within the next few months. And this trend is really as a result of what we're seeing in the crypto space, which is there's more and more fragmentation of blockchains, right? There's more layer 1s, layer 2s, other chains every single day, which really fragments the user base as well as liquidity. So from an application developer standpoint, you have to build interchain on day one, which is like building your application so that it can scale with more and more chains. And that's what Axelar is really here for, right? Our infrastructure, our SDKs and building blocks are meant to enable developers to build these more natively cross-chain applications right on day one. So I'd say that's the first major trend. The second major trend, I would say, is that developers are really trying to focus on just the application layer, as I mentioned earlier. They don't really want to build some of these infrastructure pieces. They just want to focus on writing out core logic, which is why we've actually built the Axelar virtual machine based on this direct feedback. What we heard from our cross-chain developers was that they were actually spending up towards of 70% of the time deploying contracts and maintaining contracts on all these different chains. And with the Axelar virtual machine, another important feature is that developers will be able to build right on the Axelar VM on Axelar chain in CosmWasm, and they'll be able to then deploy these contracts on any of the chains supported by Axelar within a few clicks. And this will really save them loads and loads of time so they can focus on the things that matter, right? So in that sense, we believe Axelar virtual machine is kind of like the Kubernetes of Web3. And lastly, the final trend we're seeing in the cross-chain space is that people are really finally valuing decentralization and doing their homework and understanding the impacts of different architectures of cross-chain providers. Before, I think during the bull market, frankly, people didn't really care so much about whether a bridge or a cross-chain solution is decentralized. They didn't really care too much about how secure it was. people just wanted something that worked, right? Things were moving so quickly. There was so much capital in the space. People just wanted to move the stuff from one point A to point B. And as long as it worked, it didn't matter. But now after, a ton of hacks, and as the space is really maturing and we're, dealing with everything from native crypto projects to big enterprises, people care about really like every detail of your tech stack. How secure it is it? Is it audited? Is it open source? How decentralized is it really? And what really happened this last week was the Uniswap cross-chain assessment, right? A group of experts appointed by the Uniswap Foundation spent almost 6 months doing the most detailed due diligence on all of the leading cross-chain providers, right? And their findings is super important for the space because it's a true public good that everyone can reference and understand the different nuances between Axelar versus some of our competitors in the space.
Right. So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned about the Uniswap cross-chain deployment. So can you tell us more about like what that actually is, like how does it work, and like when can we expect it to come live?
Yeah, so for some additional context, there is that Uniswap has obviously different deployments on different chains, but in order to facilitate effective cross-chain governance, they need to use a messaging bridge to be able to pass over the different votes on different chains. And what we saw, like a couple months back, was that there was temp checks being proposed by the community. Some people voted for some bridges on certain chains, and it was a very like unstructured process, right? So the foundation said, let's make this more structured. Let's set up a formal process where we evaluate all of the leading cross-chain solutions and help the community make an informed decision based on what trade-offs and what advantages each of these bridges have. So after a very long, detailed process where they spoke with every cross-chain provider, their teams, and got them to answer various technical questions, they came out with the results of their assessment. And the results were that out of all of the bridges that submitted, only 2 were approved for Uniswap's cross-chain needs, right? One was Axelar, and the second one was Wormhole. And you can find all the details of the assessment online or on the Uniswap Foundation just by Googling it.
Great. And you also mentioned about like Axelar being like the decentralized interoperability solution. So can you let us know like how decentralized is it, like maybe in terms of like the validator set or like in terms of the mechanism design, like why is it the most decentralized solutions that we're seeing in the current market?
Yeah, for sure, right? We kind of talked about earlier how the important role that validators play on the Axelar network. So, as the recap, Axelar uses delegated proof of stake consensus, right? And our validator set is fully permissionless. So anyone can spin up a validator, and as long as they have enough delegation from the community, they'll be part of the active validator set. And as of today, we have 75 active validators and over 40 inactive validators. And they really range from community members, professional validators to investors, and as well as Axelar partners. And we really believe that this kind of design, right, using this battle-tested proof of stake consensus is what makes Axelar the most decentralized solution. So one of the concerns that the Uniswap committee had is that for upgrades of Axelar, it was run by a 4 out of 8 multi-sig. However, this was really just, we had this set up to bootstrap the network, right? We've always had the intention of shifting away from that as, we get off our training wheels, which is really right now. So we already had posted on the community forum a few weeks ago that we're going to be shifting away from this multi-sig structure so that the network is even more decentralized and permissionless.
Right. So let's move on to talk about like the topic that a lot of people concerned about when talking about like cross-chain protocols in general, which is security. So can you let us know, like, have you guys like been audited? Like, how secure is the platform, and like how can you assure that the platform will be safe for all the users to use for asset transfer or like just general message passing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Short answer is yes. Axelar has been audited over 30 times, and it continues to go through ongoing audits for not only our core code, but also our example, our building blocks, our example, and other important smart contracts in our repo. We also have one of the largest bug bounties on ImmuneFi of 2.25 million. But I want to say, like, these are kind of like table stakes, right? For us, security is of the utmost importance here at Axelar. And how we think about security is really like in two folds. First, we think about security by design. We kind of talked about earlier where, because we believe Axelar is very decentralized, it is more secure in its design, right? You can think of it as when you have centralized solutions, centralized bridges, and there's a single point of failure, and when many of them have so much, locked assets, it creates this honeypot effect where it puts a target on their back, and it's just a matter of time until someone hacks into it because they're constantly looking out for bugs or smart contract errors, things like that. But when it's decentralized, the attack vector is much less. It's way harder to actually suffer an exploit. In addition to this kind of like decentralized design, we also have put in place multiple what we call preemptive measures, right? Kind of, you can think of them as safety measure in case something goes wrong, because we really believe at the end of the day, anything could still be hacked. So one of the most important features that Axelar has implemented is called rate limits. And what this does is that it puts a maximum cap on how much an asset could be transferred in a given time interval. So as an example, today the rate limit is set at, I think, 5 million USDC per day on the network level. But rate limits has also been built in so that you can apply this on the application level, and you can set this based on your needs so it doesn't affect your regular operations. So what this means is, even in an emergency, there is a max loss that can happen to the network. On top of that, we follow best practices like rotating our validator keys, very frequently, so that it can prevent a malicious actor from accumulating the keys and attacking the network. So yeah, these are just some of the things that we're doing to make sure that security is always paramount here at Axelar. But you can also, like I said, read through the Uniswap assessment, where they really emphasize on the differences in design between Axelar and some of the protocols and how that impacts security.
Right. So I think, like, because Axelar is a proof of stake network, right? So it's very natural that it has its own token, right, which is the AXL token. But because of Axelar is trying to do like a lot of different like stuff, right? So can you elaborate more about the utility of the AXL token? Like, where is it being used? Like, what's the utility in general?
Yeah, for sure. So with the AXL token, I'd say there's roughly like 4 key functions. The first one is very similar to the gas token of any other like blockchain layer 1, layer 2, right? And the AXL token is a medium for transaction fees and any other fees for network usage. It's paid by users to the validators that run the network, right? If you go on the Axelar scan, you'll see that our relay fees is denominated in AXL. So as there's more cross-chain transactions, more AXL is used to pay for those transactions. The second use case of the AXL token is for governance, right? So anyone that holds AXL can actually stake AXL and participate in governance proposals on the Axelar community forum. This could be anything from changing a parameter or a protocol upgrade. And we talked about earlier is that how this links together is when you own the AXL token, you can delegate it to one of the validators on the Axelar network, right? Or you can actually spin up your own validator. The third thing is that AXL enables incentive to support our decentralized proof of stake consensus, right? And in this case, which it would secure the network since it validates transactions on chain. The validators will then receive AXL rewards as well as incentive to continue securing the network, as mentioned earlier. And lastly, of course, similar to many other protocols, AXL is used to reward ecosystem builders and community contributors, right? So, whenever someone is building something that is great for the Axelar community, for the cross-chain space, feel free to go to our community forum to post your idea and apply for a community grant. It'll go through, a snapshot vote, and the community will then vote whether we support it through our community and pool.
Right. So let's move on to talk about like what would be the future development of Axelar. So first of all, so is there any upcoming announcement or key milestone that we should all pay attention to?
I feel like that's what people tune into stuff for, right? Everyone wants a little bit of alpha.
Yep, exactly.
I'd say there's a few things that we're really excited about here at Axelar, right? In the beginning of July, on the second week of July, we're launching one of our most important products called Interchain Tokens. And what Interchain Tokens does is it allows anyone to create a true omni-chain token or make an existing token omni-chain in just a few clicks or a few minutes. This doesn't require any code or technical skills because we'll have built a portal that anyone can actually do this. And these interchain tokens will be able to be native on each of the chains that people want, either through like a lock and unlock or mint and burn mechanism. And these tokens will be interoperable with each other across these chains, right? So this completely removes the need of wrapped assets like with traditional asset bridges, as mentioned. And there's some unique perks to this as well, where a token created through interchain tokens will have the same token address across these chains, which makes it even more user friendly. And we already have some very major projects that's committed to using interchain tokens and shifting to this new standard. From our perspective, this is really the start of a new age where any project that's thinking of going cross-chain will use the interchain token standard.
Right. Yeah. I guess like omni-chain future is like very important where we can like actually aggregate all the liquidity from like all the different chains, all the different like standards instead of like having like one token on like each ecosystem. So and moving on to like the competitive landscape, right? So because there are a lot of bridges and a lot of like interoperability solutions out there. So I understand that you mentioned a lot about like how Axelar is different from the existing like solutions and how is it different. But like what would you see as the competitive landscape like going forward in the future for interoperability solutions?
Yeah, before I go into that question, Tommy, I just wanted to answer your earlier question about like what is the end goal for Axelar. So, the interchain token is something exciting to look out for, but it's really just a piece of the puzzle in what Axelar is trying to build, right? And what we're trying to build is a chain agnostic future where, every asset could be interoperable across any chain, across any application. And that's really the future where we think that's inevitable at this point. There's going to be thousands of blockchains. And when you have true decentralized message passing technology like Axelar, what you can build in Web3 are these applications that when a user uses it, they don't know what chain it's on. They don't know what chain it connects to, nor do they care. Very similar to kind of the experience we have in Web2 today. And Axelar is really devoted to building these tools to make it easier to build these interchain applications. And we think this will directly help with making crypto Web3 more mainstream and driving adoption for the next billion users.
Right. And yeah, so going back to the competitive landscape, so what would you see is like the major like competition? Is it more like who can be faster to reach like the interchain future, or is it like what kind of factors will determine who are the winners of the cross chain like competitions?
Yeah, I think first of all, I want to say I don't think it's a zero sum game. I think crypto is growing so quickly, and cross chain is a segment, a vertical in crypto that's growing even quicker, right? Because every day we talked about earlier, there's more and more chains. So I think there's tons of room for everyone to build together, collaborate together, and grow together. But with that said, I think what will differentiate some winners versus losers in this space will be one, like whether they're decentralized or not, right? Because this directly links to security, and people care about this, right? Like if you're building in crypto, chances are you really believe in the ethos of decentralization. And if application builders then have to use a centralized interoperability solution, it really defeats the point, right? And people are really realizing that. The second thing is, I think you have to have scale to be a leader in this space, because building as we talked about earlier, this kind of message passing bridge is very technically complex. And it's not something you can do just with a small team where you fork an application. You need to really like a very strong, top-notch engineering team to build out this kind of infrastructure. And also, you do have economies of scale, right? For example, with Axelar, because we run the full stack, we're able to do things like batching transactions. And as there's more transactions going through the Axelar network, we see, economies of scale in gas costs and things like this. So given these dynamics, I think what we'll see is there is going to be a few leaders in the cross-chain space that most applications will end up using.
Yep, definitely very exciting to see what will the cross-chain verticals develops in the coming 2 years or even like a few months, because a lot can happen in a few months in crypto world. So for our audience, right, are there any like ways to engage, to participate in the Axelar community? So what would you suggest, right, for someone who never heard about like Axelar before today's AMA? So where would you suggest them to look for the resources? How can they get engaged in the Axelar community?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Tommy. Because cross-chain is so new and these interchain applications are even newer, a lot of people, like when they hear about this stuff, they're just like, oh, it's so like hard to really fathom, right? And for me, I've always been a person that needs to actually try an application to really understand how it works. So because Axelar is only on the infrastructure layer, there isn't much you can actually try directly on Axelar. So I'd encourage users in our audience today to actually go try out some of these interchain applications built on top of Axelar. The three I would recommend is one is Squid Router. So Squid is the one that allows you to swap any asset into any other across these chains in a single click. The second one I'd recommend is called Prime Protocol.
Hey Jason, I think we lost you. We lost the audio. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it works now. We
Apologies.
just lost you for like 10 seconds. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, my AirPods died. Yeah, I was saying the second application to try is Prime Protocol. So Prime Protocol is the first true cross-chain borrowing lending protocol where you can, deposit collateral on one chain and then take out a loan on another. And it's a great application to try because you really have no idea what chain Prime is really built on. You really see just this one seamless interface where you can deposit asset from any chain and then take out another asset on a different chain. And then lastly, for our people who are more excited about the NFT space, I would recommend you try MintDAO, which is building this cross-chain NFT launchpad where you can mint NFTs on any chain and then be able to bridge it onto any other chain. So I think these three are very good examples of what we think the future applications will look like in the crypto space. And you let us know what you think of the user experience. Always curious to hear everyone's feedback.
Yep, I would definitely try out after the AMA and let you know my feedback. Yep, so I think this also wraps up all the time we have like for the AMA questions for today. Once again, thank you, Jason, for joining us. And a big thank you to the Crypto.com and Axelar community for sending in the questions. But before we say goodbye, is there any final message you have for those who are watching the live stream now?
I would say, guys, I know right now the markets are tough and we're deep in the bear market, but once you see the kind of progress we're making with the technology, with the cool new applications that's being built, you can't help but be optimistic about crypto, about Web3 and the future that's coming for us. So, keep building, guys, and stay optimistic.
Yep. So thank you so much, Jason. And for all the audience, you can find Jason on Twitter. His handle is at Jason_C_Ma. And you can follow Axelar at AxelarCore. And please make sure to follow Crypto.com to keep up with the latest news, upcoming events, contests, and more. Follow us on Twitter at Crypto.com and make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any future AMAs. Thank you, everyone, and see you next time.
Thanks for having me, Tommy.
Cheers.